As Richard cradled the injured baby dolphin in his arms, the cheers from the beach echoed around him. But there was something else in the water. His heart raced as shadows beneath the surface shifted, revealing an unexpected presence that would change everything. Watch till the end to find out what happened next, and subscribe to The Unusual for more thrilling stories. Richard swam back to shore with the dolphin in his arms, so he made sure the animal was safe with the rest of his team before making his way over to the crowd. As he got out of the water, he was met with praise from many of the people who had gathered on the beach. Others were gushing about the sight of the baby dolphin being bottle-fed in the ocean. Just then, Richard saw a man dashing toward him. The man stopped in front of him, slightly breathless, and started babbling words he couldn't really make out. Richard was no stranger to this kind of reaction from the public. People often marveled at the sight of rescuers like him jumping straight into action without a moment's hesitation. After all, this area was known all around the country for the high concentration of dolphins and the occasional whale, which meant Richard and his team were always on alert. The dolphin population around Punta Colorado was important to everyone, and locals who often visited the beach were well aware of the fantastic work the local rehabilitation center, SOS Rescate de Marina, did in looking after sick and injured dolphins. Where possible, the patients would always be released back into the wild once they were better. Keeping wild dolphin numbers up was important to everyone who worked at the center. Sometimes the rehabilitation center would get a dolphin that was just too sick or injured to return to the wild, though, and in those cases, it would remain at the center for the rest of its life. But the center didn't just look after the animals that were brought to them. A dedicated team was always on call for any rescues that needed to take place. Soon their skills would be put to the test. Around midday, the rehabilitation center received a call from a concerned member of the public. They had spotted a baby dolphin near Punta Colorado Beach, and they were worried that it seemed to be injured. To add to the urgency of the case, the dolphin seemed very young and hadn't been spotted with any family. Richard, the director of SOS Rescate de Marina Rehabilitation Center, gathered a small team and headed out to the beach, hopeful that they would reach the baby dolphin in time to rescue it. As Richard commanded his team, they hit the coast highway at a good speed, and the van was filled with the energy of a team on a very sensitive mission. To their left, the ocean lay in the midday sun, but no one inside the car cared much about the view. All attention was to the front and to the weak life dwelling in the water off the shores of Punta Colorado. Inside the van, tension was thick. Anna, the lead veterinarian, was frantically scrolling through her phone, reading up on emergency dolphin care procedures. It means if it's young and separated from its pod, it may not survive. The words they had heard earlier got into every one of them. Miguel, the marine biologist, folded the hands and looked out the window through which the landscapes only streamed past. Each thump on the road made the equipment in the back vibrate. Nets, medical cargo, and an oxygen cylinder that moved vigorously in their direction. Just then, the radio crackled to life, jarring everyone from their thoughts. SOS Rescate, this is Lifeguard Station Bravo. Update on the dolphin. It's still close to the shore, but it's not moving as much now. It might be caught in the rocks, came the voice over the radio, breaking slightly from interference. Miguel swore under his breath, his fingers drumming nervously on the door. Richard, gripping the steering wheel tighter, narrowed his eyes. How much further? He asked no one in particular, though everyone knew the route. 10 minutes, maybe 15, Anna replied, her voice tight with stress. The van rounded another sharp bend, the cliffs above them casting long shadows over the road. Out of nowhere, they encountered the unexpected. A horde of tourists had stopped in the middle of the narrow road, their cars parked in chaotic clusters. Some were standing on the cliff's edge, cameras and phones in hand, snapping pictures of the breathtaking ocean view below. Are you kidding me? Richard muttered through clenched teeth as he slammed on the brakes. The van skidded slightly before coming to a sudden halt, the screech of the tires echoing off the rocky cliffs. Inside, the team lurched forward in their seats, their hearts racing for a different reason now. What the hell is this? Miguel growled, staring at the oblivious crowd. We don't have time for this. Richard slammed his hand on the horn, the blaring noise cutting through the chatter of the tourists. Some of them turned to glance at the van, but most stayed fixed on the scenery, completely unaware of the desperate situation unfolding just a few miles away. Time was slipping through their fingers like sand, and every second lost felt like a countdown on the Dolphin's fate. "Get out of the way!" Richard bellowed, leaning halfway out of the driver's side window, his face a mix of fury and desperation. Anna clutched her seatbelt, her eyes darting between the clueless tourists and the road ahead. Miguel wasn't waiting. He jumped out of the van, waving his arms frantically at the people blocking the road. "Move! We have an emergency!" he shouted, his voice rising with frustration. "There's a dolphin in distress." His words seemed to finally register with a few of the tourists, who started to move, albeit slowly, as if the urgency hadn't sunk in. A large SUV sat diagonally across the road, its driver leisurely exiting with a camera in hand, ready to join the crowd. Richard's patience snapped. "Anna, get the kit ready," he growled, more to calm his own rising panic than to issue orders. She nodded, fumbling through the supplies behind her, eyes darting toward the scene unfolding in front of them. Miguel pounded on the SUV's hood, startling the driver, who finally got back behind the wheel and started to reverse. The road began to clear, but the delay felt eternal. Every car that moved felt like another moment slipping away from the young Dolphin struggling on the beach. Finally, the path was clear. Richard floored the gas pedal, the van surging forward as Miguel barely managed to dive back inside, slamming the door shut. "That cost us 5 minutes," Anna muttered, but no one responded. They were too focused now. As they sped toward Punta Colorado, the radio crackled once more. "It's looking worse," came the lifeguard's voice. "The Dolphin's barely moving now, and we think it might be injured. People are trying to get closer, but we're holding them back." Richard's jaw clenched. "Hang on," he muttered, eyes fixed on the road ahead as the beach came into view in the distance. As Richard and his team approached Punta Colorado, a small crowd began to form on the beach as more people had spotted the Dolphin. Interest had grown in the rescue, and people were eager to know more about what the rehabilitation center could do for it. Richard could clearly see the Dolphin for himself and decided to head out into the water to get a better look. He pulled on a wetsuit and swam out into the ocean. As they plunged into the rescue boat, the sound of the engine grew louder as they made their way towards the signal. Richard could also see his team members reflected in the facial mirrors of water waves, which were splashing against the hull. The water was very still, however. It was creepy. All of a sudden, as they cruised past a sharp protruding rock, it shook uncontrollably. Suddenly, a pod of dolphins approached them, their streamlined bodies gliding through the water with incredible velocity. Richard and his team look at each other, not knowing if that was a good sign or a bad one. Suddenly, one of the dolphins jumped out of the water. It seemed as if the Dolphin wanted to tell us something important. Richard tilted his head and looked eyes toward the sun to see what was really going on. As they navigated closer to the beach, Richard noticed something moving in the distance. The water seemed to boil as a thrashing mass erupted from the depths of another dolphin. But this one was larger and agitated. He whipped its tail like crazy. Water splashed over the boat. Richard's heart sank as he realized the truth. This dolphin was probably swimming in an attempt to guard what they appeared to be rushing to rescue: a baby. Just then, the larger dolphin dived beneath the waves, leaving a trail of bubbles in its wake. Richard felt the pressure mounted. He had to do something. "We need to hurry," he bellowed to his team, to kill the throttle forward. When the two get closer to the shore, Richard's mind starts to wander. He felt hunted and couldn't shake off the belief that there wasn't much time left, and the bigger dolphin made him feel worse. They arrived at Punta Colorado, and a large group of people gathered on the shore of the beach. As Richard and his team prepared to disembark, the larger dolphin broke the surface one last time, letting out a desperate call that echoed across the water as if summoning the attention of all the beachgoers. A ripple of excitement mixed with apprehension swept through the crowd as they watched the unfolding drama. As Richard and his team neared and closer to Punta Colorado, a few persons came on the production beach. More persons had seen the dolphin. Concern had been raised about the rescue, and people wanted to learn more on what the rehabilitation center could offer for it. Luckily, the water was calm that day, and as soft waves lapped up against the shore, Richard swiftly made his way over to the site of the dolphin. The rest of his team kept their distance in a small boat, ready to be on hand should the dolphin need rescuing. The team at SOS Resgate de Marina Rehabilitation Center often photographed and recorded rescues. Sometimes in the moment, it could be difficult to make an instant assessment of what was wrong with the dolphin, and videos and photographs often helped the team to see what was going on around them. More often than not, in the more difficult cases, video footage and photos led to more in-depth answers about a dolphin's injuries. The videos also served as a warning to the public about things that they were doing that could be damaging the dolphin's habitat. As Richard got closer to the dolphin, the rest of the team also inched a little closer in the boat to get better footage of the rescue. It was now very clear that the baby dolphin was small, but no one had quite realized just how young it was. When Richard reached the dolphin, he gasped when he saw its umbilical cord was still attached. It was concerning enough that the baby was in the middle of the ocean without its mother, but Richard noticed it was also injured and weak. He gently held the baby in his arms as a member of his team passed a bottle of milk to him. He fed the dolphin, hoping to give it some strength. By now, he could detect faint cheering and clapping coming from the beach as the crowd watched him bottle feed the dolphin. The rest of the team was transfixed on the baby dolphin. Many of them couldn't ever remember rescuing a dolphin quite this young, and it was obvious that it needed a lot of care. When the dolphin had finished the milk, Richard spent some time lying in the ocean with the baby, gently stroking it to reassure it that everything was going to be okay. Since he hadn't needed to swim that far out, Richard told his team he would swim back to shore with the baby dolphin and then meet them on the beach. The animal seemed relaxed in his arms, and he didn't want to put it through the ordeal of being passed from hand to hand onto a boat. He turned back to face the beach and began the short swim back. Just seconds in, though, he heard frantic shouts coming from both the shore and his team on the boat. However, he wasn't close enough to either to work out what was happening. Maybe they were just happy to see the rescue so close up. When he reached the beach, he was mostly met with cheering and praise. Amongst the clapping and cheering, though, he kept picking out the odd phrase that didn't tie in with everyone else. Just as he was handing the baby dolphin to a member of his team, a man came dashing through the crowd toward Richard. The rescuer was expecting a string of praise, but once the man was able to steady his breath, he told Richard that something amazing had happened while he'd been swimming back to the beach. His team confirmed what the man was saying and explained that was the reason they'd been shouting. As Richard swam back to shore, a pod of dolphins appeared behind him. At first, the crowd had only spotted one dolphin rearing its head above the water, but soon they lost count of how many dolphins were watching Richard carry out the rescue. He was speechless. Lanta dolphins, like the baby he just rescued, were declining in number. If what everyone was telling him was true, then they had just seen a very large pod of Lanta dolphins just off the coast of the beach. Richard could barely process what this meant. Right now, all his efforts had to go into saving the baby dolphin, and he couldn't waste a single moment to rejoice about the appearance of the pod. But on his way back to the rehabilitation center, he began to think about the significance of those Lanta dolphins. This species is listed as vulnerable on the IUCN Red List of Threatened Species. Around 2,000 to 4,000 dolphins die each year as a result of overfishing, damming, and subaquatic sonar pollution. If things carry on the way they are, then Lanta dolphins will soon be on the brink of extinction. The possibility of the Lanta dolphins becoming extinct made Richard even more aware of how important it was to try and nurse the baby dolphin back to health. Thinking about the relations of life in the ocean, Richard tries to find the right way back, and it was really winding when he heard a voice behind. Something made the Lanta dolphin so precious to him as he remembered every rescue he had ever done, and the sweet, sour taste of victory that generally went hand in hand with the idea of a loss. Every meeting with those giants was a chance to realize how vulnerable they are to human behavior. He averted his mind to the large pod they saw before. Could it be a sign of hope, or just a brief vision of what has been a long time ago? As Richard's boat glided through the water, he could almost hear the echoes of the dolphins' calls, a haunting reminder of their dwindling numbers. What had happened to the baby dolphin's mother? Did she suffer a long, painful end? Or did she meet her fate in an instant? The image of the baby clinging to life alone in the vast ocean filled him with a sense of urgency. He imagined the mother dolphin desperately searching for her lost child, calling out into the deep blue, only to be met with silence. It was extremely unusual for a baby dolphin to be left on its own, and given that it had sustained injuries, the team reached the conclusion that its mother must have been fatally injured right after birth, which is how the baby had ended up on its own. Even though the large pod of dolphins had been spotted, he and his team were assured that the baby's mother hadn't been amongst the pod. It was extremely unusual for a baby dolphin to be left on its own, and given that it had sustained injuries, the team reached the conclusion that its mother must have been fatally injured right after birth, which is how the baby had ended up on its own. The team spent the next few days looking after the baby around the clock, but it didn't seem to be getting any stronger. No one knew how long it had been on its own, but it was clear the time it had spent without a mother had seriously taken a toll on it. Unfortunately, despite everyone's best efforts, the baby dolphin sadly passed away a few days later. As news spread around the local area, everyone was affected by the loss. By now, the rescue photos onlookers had taken from the beach had gone viral, and the baby dolphin had well-wishers all around the world. Now the rehabilitation center would have to deliver the sad news via social media. Even though Richard was profoundly affected by the death of the baby dolphin that he'd held in his arms just days earlier, he began to see a silver lining. Without the rescue, the large pod of dolphins may not have been discovered. While the loss of the baby dolphin was undoubtedly sad, the rehabilitation center could now focus on learning more about the pod. In this time, Richard was determined to see it for himself. The original team from the baby dolphin rescue assembled once more and headed out in a boat to the spot where they'd carried out the rescue just a few days before. Using footage from the rescue, they were able to pinpoint the exact location where the pod had been seen by everyone but Richard. They quickly killed the engine on the boat and resolved to wait patiently to see if the pod of dolphins was still in the area. A few hours passed by, and no one had spotted a single thing. People had assembled all around the boat in order to cover every direction possible, but there hadn't even been one dolphin sighting. Richard was getting ready to admit defeat and accept that he wouldn't see the dolphin pod, but then he noticed an unusual ripple in the water. He leaned over the edge of the boat, and sure enough, just below the surface of the water was a Lanta dolphin. Was it a member of the large pod that had been spotted just days ago? Within seconds of the first animal being spotted, calls began ringing out around the boat as more dolphins were seen close to the surface. One by one, the Lanta dolphins poked their heads above the water, just as they had done the day Richard had rescued the baby dolphin. No one could keep count of how many there were, and Richard couldn't recall ever seeing a Lanta dolphin pod this large in the whole time he'd worked at the rehabilitation center. The sighting was just what the team needed after losing the baby. Back at the rehabilitation center, everyone's mood had been lifted from seeing the pod. They had broken the news of the death of the baby dolphin on their social media pages that morning, but now they had some good news to share as well. While there was no denying that Lanta dolphins were still endangered, the presence of such a large pod was fantastic news. Given the pod's location, Richard and his team could also monitor the dolphins. The staff at the rehabilitation center set about formulating a plan that would allow them to track and monitor the pod. By keeping a close eye on the dolphins, they would be able to spot any problems straight away and treat any sick or injured animals accordingly, thereby ensuring that the pod remained as populated as it currently was. They hadn't been able to save the baby dolphin, but now they had a whole pod to care for. That evening, Richard looked back on the footage of the baby dolphin rescue for the first time. He'd been so busy taking care of the baby and then looking for the pod that he hadn't had a chance to watch it. Seeing the baby dolphin again filled Richard's heart with sadness. She had been so small and vulnerable that it was a miracle she had survived as long as she had all on her own. There was no way of knowing if the baby and her mother were part of the large pod they'd found. But as Richard saw himself turning back toward the beach and the pod appearing behind him, he got the sense that the dolphins understood he was there to help. Tracking and monitoring the pod gave the rehabilitation center a whole new purpose. It wasn't something they had done before, but they knew it would make a huge difference to the Lanta dolphin population. Not only would the rehabilitation center be on hand to help sick and injured dolphins, but they could also educate people about the pod and Lanta dolphins through their social media updates. While the baby dolphin hadn't been strong enough to pull through, Her rescue had led to an even larger number of dolphins being taken care of. Richard couldn't think of a better legacy for the baby than that. Now it's over to you. What would you have done if you'd been at Punta Colorado Beach and seen the dolphins? Have you ever thought about becoming a volunteer for an animal rescue group? We'd love to hear your thoughts, so please leave a comment below. Thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next video.